It really is good to be here, actually. You're a fun crowd. I like you. If I was looking for a town to live in and a church, I'd probably move. No, seriously, I think it's good. You're onto something. You got something going on. You know, it's depends whether you have me back, but you know, I'm going to read something to you. I used to be kind of like, I don't like to point at me, but then I started realizing sometimes you need to do some things. So now I need my phone to behave itself. Okay, come back. Oh well. I was going to read something to you. Let's see where it is. It'll come up in a minute. I'm going to do 3 or 4 things this afternoon. First of all, I'm going to do some Q&A, but actually before that, I'm going to read something. And my nervousness in reading it is that I don't really like to point at me, but then there are times when what you need to do is to give yourself as an example to stimulate you. And I personally had a real struggle. What would happen to me, the millennials, wherever you are, they all like to brand things. I don't know if you've noticed that. I mean, there's a whole new career they created of people who do branding for a living. You know, it's like, and I must have had 10 in my office. These people going, what's your brand? What's your brand? And they were all trying to narrow me down to 2 words or something. So that I had this, and it was a real struggle. And I was trying to find that. And one day a consultant came into my office, you know, because it's all to do with websites and how you present yourself and stuff like that. And the consultant came into my office and he said, and I told him the problem. He said, it's easy. It's not, it's easy, you know. It's like, you haven't sat in this office when people have tried to work out who I am. He said, no, your brand is diversity. And so I wrote something. Now, in reading it, I want you to become jealous, not of me, but for me, for what I have. Does that make sense? I mean, this is my life story, and it's, you know, as all life stories, there's some blood, sweat, and tears in between the lines that sound glamorous. I mean, everyone thinks being a prison governor is glamorous. Nah, they're not that glamorous, really. But anyway, and the reason I'm doing this is because so I'm going to do this Q&A. David's going to come up and share something, and he's a wonderful man of God, and it's been an incredible journey, and kind of pretty surprised by the journey he's on, that he now works for Bonke. And then I'm going to wrap up with a message about managing ourselves, leading ourselves. And that's why I'm going to read this, because it will give you a little bit of time. And if you get bored during Q&A, you can just mull it over in your own mind. So this is me. I may have finally realized that my ministry expression and gift is diverse. Numerous modern-day marketing-inspired conversations have attempted to narrow down my brand, but generally to no avail. Then with one consultant, I had an aha moment. My life experience on my ministry is diverse, and that's a good thing, and it's who I am. My life experience has taken me from helping my parents in a small business to a short stint in the fashion industry. I wasn't a model, just in case you were wondering. Before starting a career in general and psychiatric nursing. I've saved lives and sat with people as they lost loved ones before ever entering the prison service, where I would lock up those who had taken lives or save the life of someone trying to take their own life. I've managed, led, administered, and envisioned. I've encouraged the creatives and valued the cerebral. I've sat with government leaders and cried with broken, helpless, and lost souls. I've watched my wife's tears of the pain of infertility transform into the joy of a positive pregnancy test after a healing miracle. And I've sat with parents in despair at the diagnosis of Down syndrome. I've beaten cancer and encouraged others in their fight. It is, I conclude, impossible for me to be narrowed down to a brand. I am me, and I have a broad and unusual breadth of experience and skills gained during those experiences. The thing is, you have too. But you don't always stop and see that piece. And that's really what I want to stimulate a bit of later on this afternoon. It's no wonder that I can teach on strategy or leadership, encourage the administrators, and tell the world that the work of a surgeon's hands is not a second-class healing. It's the life which I've lived. I'm a very proud father of sons and grandfather of grandsons. We specialise in boys, my wife and I. Not everyone can do it. But who has had the privilege of performing the marriage service of daughters and even walking one down the aisle. I actually carried her, I think, but that's another story. Life makes you who you are, and I've experienced God in every one of these scenarios and many more. And so my life is dedicated to serve mankind in whatever circumstance, opportunity, or need that they find themselves. I have painted, wood-turned, and always carried a great camera. I'm motivated by beauty and the discovery of beauty everywhere. I love to cook and to make great coffee. I love to serve it and to be served it. I've investigated escapes and riots, taught as a hostage negotiator trainer, and been called in to help to settle disputes and disagreements. I've served in crises and success alongside multiple denominations and have always loved the church, but been grieved at the repeated dividing of the bride. I'll teach what you might ask me or minister out of what my Father reveals, and I know that he always shows up. I want to help you know who you are, but I must help you to know who he is. I see my Heavenly Father's interest in every area of life, and I will always want you to be free to be you, unlocked from the prison of self-doubt, inferiority, or confusion. I've told a woman that her husband is alive and not dead, and I've told a prisoner he's a free man. It's the message we all must hear. We do not have to be dead, but alive. We do not have to be prisoners, but be free men. I've discovered my destiny through prophecy, planning, providence, pain, and provision. I've carried a sense of a call all of my life, but almost stumbled into it as I faithfully journeyed through life. I've always read the Bible, quoted scripture, and loved the word, but I know that it must all be summed up as the gospel of good news, salvation, and the kingdom. This is my life, and I love it, and I want to help you, your family, organization, city, nation, or continent, to know who they are and who he is. Love your life, whether a single focus or one of great diversity. I love my life in all of its variety, and I want you to too. The reason I cry over that is, for all of my life, up until 5 years ago, I compared myself. I compared myself with one type of person, evangelists. They come to my church, they'd preach, they'd lead more people to Jesus in the Starbucks line in their lunch break than I had in my life. I would look at them and I would think, I don't have the crazy story. I don't have the saved from the gutter. And then I've been on this transforming journey, which has taken me to stadiums. And one day I was in Bethel during worship, and I was about to do an altar call. Now, and I've watched the big boys and girls. They have these incredible stories, you know. And I'm just in worship, and God said to me, he said, because I wasn't really thinking about the detail of it. I was just going to do the best I could do, like I was just doing. You know, I'll just get up there and I'll tell them about Jesus. And I was standing in worship, and God said to me, he said, what was your first career, Paul? I said, I was a nurse. You know, when God asks you questions, he always knows the answer. It's like, it's you that's got to answer it. I said, I was a nurse, and what was your best day as a nurse? Oh, you know that day. You know, it was the 31st of October, 1982, when I walked into a side room, and I told Terry Thompson's wife that her husband was not dead, but alive, because I resuscitated him. And he said, yeah. And he said, what was your second career, Paul? I was a prison governor. What was your best day as a prison governor? Oh, you know, it was Belmarsh Prison, 1991. When I walked into Christopher Andrew Joyce's room, a young man dying of AIDS, who when he came into the prison wearing an orange jumpsuit, having been sent from America, and I flipped out and said, get that jumpsuit off him. I don't have anybody wearing that in my prison hospital. And we developed as near as it would be legal for me to say we were friends. We had the same age kids, and he had one dream. He wanted to go home for his son's 6th birthday party. That was his dream. And I got him the Royal Prerogative of Mercy, which really is the Royal Prerogative of Mercy signed by the Queen. I believe he was the first prisoner in the country to be released with AIDS on the Royal Prerogative of Mercy. And I walked into his side room one afternoon and I said, Christopher, there's a certificate signed by the Queen. You're a free man and not a prisoner. And I stood in that church that day and God said, see, I prepared your altar call, your entire career. I've got you ready to tell the world these two things. You don't have to be dead, but alive. You don't have to be a prisoner, but free. His name is Jesus. And that's why it always makes me cry, because it's not just the fact. It's that he did that. He made that. That's my story. Anyway, Q&A. Anyone got any questions? I've given you some fuel now, because you can ask questions about trivial things or deep things, because you can ask me what my coffee machine is, or you can ask me what my camera is, or you can ask me something deeper. But they're all important. Yeah, go on.
I've been watching Bethel TV for many years, and you all seem to have a certain style of shop. Is there a Bethel outlet somewhere in
You know, I'll tell you the true story. When I got there, they were wearing Hawaiian shirts and I was wearing long-sleeved English shirts. So they have finally caught up with me. Bill wears Robert Graham shirts. They have wisdom, love and knowledge embroidered there. They are about $218 each. I just wear pink. Thomas Pink. But my joke in America is, because I think it's funny, you know Victoria's Secret? And they have a range called Pink. I tell people in America, I say, these are pink for men. Victoria's Secret for men. I'm hoping secretly that someday one's going to go into a shop and go, it's like a shirt. But anyway.
Now you're back in the UK, what's your plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can see you're some sort of high-level businessman who needs a plan and a business plan. Okay, I was called back, no question about it. Know that I was called back and very much sent back. I'm involved really in three primary areas. One is continuing to build the network, which I built in Reading, called Global Legacy in Europe. That's a continued part of me and what I'm meant to do, and also connect with our BSSM alumni, our graduates. So that's 1/3 of my life. 1/3 of my life I work with a team in Europe, the Europe Shall Be Saved strategy team. I'm generously called the strategist on the team, and so I'm working with them, but also involved in preaching and teaching across Europe and the Awakening Europe events and such like. And then the third third of my life is me. What does my ministry look like? What does it look like when no one's telling me what to do, basically, other than my wife? But that's just life, you know. That was just humour, okay, by the way. So, and I'm actually developing a couple of things. One of them is I'm developing a leadership school, both a live and an online leadership school, which I'm tentatively at the moment calling Revival Leadership, to equip leaders both in the church and in the rest of the world for what I'm loosely calling Revival Leadership, building on my strengths, which is teaching strategy, organizational leadership, change management, relational government, the supernatural, and a very practical planning element. And then following that, once I've got that off the ground, some of what I'm going to teach a little bit this afternoon is I want to teach people to lead in life, not leading in business or organized, but how do you lead in life? Leading me, leading others, leading organizations, leading strategically, leading in a number of other ways. So that's me. My travel, I'm increasingly trying to travel out of, I travel out of pre-existing relationships. I travel out of influence. If I get given opportunities to influence either regions or networks, those are my passions. But my real belief is that it's Europe's time. I believe all of those things go together. They're not separate. I separate them just for convenience. But I really do believe it's Europe's time. I believe it's time for us to see a move of God. I feel one of the things that I've been given to do is to call the Brits and the Europeans to stand up. Let's get on our feet. Let's speak up, rise up, stand up, and let's stand on our great history. And I know people will say, what about our colonial history? Well, okay, we've all got stuff in our past. We've said sorry, we've repented. But let's have a look at our great history. Let's have a look at the great mission organizations, the preachers, the songwriters, the hymn writers. Let's look at the Christian social reformers that have been birthed out of this country and the continent of Europe. Let's stand on our history and cry out to God that he would do it again. That's it, ish, just about. Love my life, love my wife, love my grandsons, be around my kids, and enjoy this great country. Those are my plans.
When will the courses be ready?
Great question. I'm launching the live schools actually in mainland Europe, which is a deliberate strategy because we tend to do everything more in the UK. So I'm launching the live schools this summer, and I'm hoping that the online curriculum will be kind of late summer. So it's going to be a 4 terms of 10 weeks curriculum basically on revival leadership. And then the Leading in Life one probably won't be until the end of the year. The Leading in Life one I want to make available to the masses. My dream is that it's like Netflix price and it's absolutely available to the masses. I have a real passion for I think sometimes the people who stand on platforms make Christianity unattainable, unachievable, and inaccessible. It's not meant to be judgmental, but just sometimes there are things that are said and they forget that there's a real world out there. And I used to work 75, 80 hours a week. So I want to create some resources that people can grab in their car on the way to work that really equip them and empower them to lead well in life.
Thank you so much.
You spoke earlier about Jesus will build the church, but that we should ask for the keys of the kingdom, and you mentioned a little bit about these keys being wrapped up, and you'd searched deeply for them. Could you speak a little bit more about the keys of the kingdom?
Yeah, this is my interpretation. I don't know what you get if you look it up online, but salt and light are two of the kind of elements of kingdom language. Where to be salt and be light. And I started playing around with that as a thought. What would that actually look like? What does salt and light do? Salt and light make a difference. Basically, they make a difference. Light shines in the darkness. You can see stuff. Salt makes things taste better. The two things of themselves make a difference. So what would the keys to the kingdom be? They would enable us to understand our difference to make a difference. So I can't remember whether I have 6 or 7. I don't have my scribbled notes to hand, but let me just give you them as I spew them out. Number one, we have we have different rules. We live by faith. The keys to the kingdom are we live by faith, not by sight. So immediately we have a key, because that means that I don't live by what I can see. I live by what I cannot see. And so, Abraham is the father of faith. He was looking for a city. Did he find it? Trick question, no. He's the father of faith. If he'd found a city, he would have been the father of finding cities. But he forever gave us a way of living. So number one, faith. Jesus said, will I find faith? So to me, one of the keys to the kingdom is faith. I believe the prophetic. We live by a different map reference. It's the prophetic. I absolutely believe in the power of the prophetic to change your life. I know nothing more powerful to redirect your life than the prophetic. And by prophetic, I don't just mean I see you, doing X. I mean calling out who you are, seeing in you who you are. So we live by different rules, faith. We live by a different map reference. We are different. You're anointed. I don't know whether you know that, but you're anointed. The 1 John 1 or 2:27 says that if he abides in us, we have received, I forget the way it's phrased, but we have received the anointing. We're anointed. That makes you different. David, somewhere in the book, there's 8 verses between these two events. There's David looking after sheep. Nobody knows him. Even his dad's forgotten him. And 8 verses later, somebody is telling Saul, I met this guy. He's a mighty warrior, a skillful musician, a man of God, and God is with him. What had happened in between? He was anointed. We need to believe our very identity, and just to, I don't want to make this complete preach, but what are we members of? The Christian faith. What do we struggle most with? Faith. The prophetic is, the gospel is by nature prophetic. It's the very nature of the gospel. Past, present, future. So it's the core of what we believe is the gospel, another key to the kingdom. We are anointed. We are Christians, which means little anointed ones. Our very identity is we are anointed. We are different. We've been made different by the anointing. So we are different. We have a different clock, which is wrapped up in some of what I shared this morning, but we live by heaven's clock, not earth's clock. So we live by a different clock. I believe that's a key to the kingdom. When you understand what time it is, it's a key to the kingdom. You know what to do. We have a different dad. Luke 15, is the story of the dad. It's coincidentally has a couple of boys in it, but it's really the story of the dad. We have a different dad. He does things differently. He breaks rules for relationship. We've tended the other way around. It's a key to the kingdom. When we discover dad, we discover a key to the kingdom. Our cry makes a difference. Psalm 42 or 46, one or the other, says, where deep calls unto deep. All the intercessors know that verse, don't you? You're like, it's your verse, like deep cries unto deep. I didn't know what it meant until a man said to me, it says deep calls unto deep at the sound of thy waterfalls. The word waterfall is wrongly translated. It's really a water spout. A water spout is created when there's a storm in the ocean and a storm in the sky, and the two storms meet and form a water spout which connects heaven and earth. Why is that? Well, that gives us a clue. Your cry makes a difference. So, for every cry on earth, there's a matching cry in heaven. So Hannah had a cry, I want a son, but God had a cry, I want a prophet. He was waiting for Hannah to release her cry before he could release the prophet. There's a connection. So I call those. Now, there might be a theologian in here who says, oh, no, really, it's this. You need to combine the 3 Greek words and the other Hebrew word, and you put together and you get these keys to the kingdom. I think the keys to the kingdom are the simplicity of faith, prophecy, time, father, anointing, cry, and there is one other, and I can't think what it is that I have, because I had 7, because I'm like that. I would remember it was 7, but I don't know if that helps you. It's all about different, because the keys to the kingdom have to make a difference, because thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which means that it's different. So the keys to understanding the kingdom are that it must be about being different. Does that make sense? That was a free preach. You can thank him later. Yeah.
What's the best bit of advice you've been given, and who and where from?
The best bit of advice I've been given? Oh, gosh. Well, ultimately, my wife's grandfather, who told me go and get some experience working with people in 1975, because it led me on my journey. Oh, gosh. There's so many places. I mean, practically, I don't know why somebody didn't tell me this when I wrote my wedding list, but they should have done, is never compromise on shoes, seats, and beds. Where do you spend your whole life? Either on your feet, on a chair, or in a bed. Why didn't somebody tell me to never compromise on those 3 things? Those 3 things, you should spend as much as you can afford on those 3 things. And part of the reason why I even know that, call me dumb, but I hadn't even thought about it. I think lots of us like that. You just go, what happened to me, I had this really weird story. I'll keep it as short as I possibly can. I was given a prophetic word on a Tuesday by a man called Dave Wagner. In the prophetic word was that you will see cancer destroyed in the last days of people's lives. I went home that night. When I had cancer in 2008, somebody bought me a pair of cowboy boots. And I'm a Brit. Cowboy boots are a bit weird on a Brit. I was speaking the next day. Now, up at that point in time, I had sciatica, low back pain. I had cramps in my calf, cramps across my toes, and I was just in pain. I knew it wasn't vascular, so I wasn't kind of worried, but I couldn't shake it. I put my cowboy boots on at 7 o'clock, these boots that are bought for me to crush cancer, which Bobby Connor saw on me from the stage in Bethel and said, those boots are for crushing cancer, boy, which he didn't even know, the person who bought them. So it's like, so I put them on 7 o'clock on the Wednesday morning on a day when I was speaking at a conference. And I said to my wife, I'm starting tomorrow. I'm crushing cancer with those boots. I wore those boots from 7 o'clock in the morning till midnight that day. And I got home and I go to my wife, that is the weirdest thing. I have no pain in my legs. And I discovered that my problem in life was arch support. And I now don't buy cheap shoes. I will not, if I can't feel the arch when I stand in normally when you try on shoes, you want to see if the toes press at the end. I'm not interested in that. I want to know if I can feel my arch on my shoe. Changed my life. I know it's a weird story, but I'm just being honest. So I sometimes pray for people. They'll come at the front and go, can you pray for me? I've got really bad cramps. Like, well, before we do anything else, those shoes, those flip-flops, they're probably causing it. So those two bits of advice. Go and get some experience working with people and never compromise on chairs, shoes and beds. You weren't expecting that answer, were you? It's true, though.
A more serious one. Can you tell us very briefly about what it was like? It doesn't have to be brief. Sorry, that sounded rude. About what it was like when God told you how to be a son again.
Yeah, there's 3 minutes for my 30 minutes. Really? Okay. Gosh. You know my story, obviously, because you know a bit of it. So here's basically the story. My dad died in 1973. And I got saved that day. And I'm in Bethel in 2005, sitting in a meeting, listening to Danny Silk preach a message. I'm sure it was a very good message. I'd just been asked to build our network. And I was having a conversation with God, and in that conversation I said to God, how do you father an organization? Those are my words. Now, in a way, I asked the question because in my past I've run a prison, and people said that I fathered prisoners. In fact, there's a book that has a quote, says in it, Paul treated the prisoners like sons. My sons say that I treated them like prisoners, but that's no point. But so it wasn't new to me conceptually, but now I'm at Bethel, and I said, God, how do you father an organization? And he said to me, you have to be a son first. And that was okay, but then he said to me, but you stopped being a son the day your father died, 32 years before. So, which was painful, but I immediately could remember my uncle and aunt coming to my house. They bought me a Black & Decker workmate. I don't know why you would give somebody that the day after their dad died, but they did. Lovely people, bless them. And they slapped me on the back, and they said, you're the man of the house now. And then I immediately saw that I had left behind being a son, that somehow I did that. So I became, I would say in life, a competent, responsible, non-question answering, non-help asking, typical man, if you like. And some of the wives are going, yeah, I'm married to one of those. Anyway. So, I'm like, wow, what do you do? What do you do with that? I didn't know what to do, to be honest with you. And I'd read some of the stuff. It wasn't that I hadn't read stuff. And the first thing that I realized was I needed to repent. And so, now, even this, as a concept, was new to me. But it was me and God. And that was, I'm repenting of stopping being a son. I had no control over that, did I? But I realized that, Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory. We typically repent from sin. But I don't know how well we've been taught. Well, I do. We haven't been well taught how to repent unto glory. And glory is sonship and identity. And so the first thing I did was I repented. I said, God, please forgive me that I stopped being a son the day my father died. And to me, I saw it, the way I saw it was that I had spiritual atherosclerosis for 32 years and no blood could get from the father to the son. It was just blocked. And I did an okay job, but my sons, when they came, were a responsibility that I had to work harder for, kind of. It was in there. And I did lots of things right. But there was that undergirded attitude. So I repented. Next thing I did, Bill had just published Supernatural Power of a Transformed Mind. And in there, there's a chapter on sanctified imagination. And somehow I connected these things. I don't know how I did, but I did. And I laid on my bed. This all happened in the course of a week. I laid on my bed, and I had a conversation with my dad. And it all came out of, he redeems the years the locusts have eaten. And for me, it was like unblocking the arteries. See, I hadn't had a dad. In my head, I didn't think I have a dad. He's gone. And what happened was I laid on my bed and I reopened the line of communication. I didn't speak to the dead. It was not necromancy or anything like that. I've been accused of it, but it wasn't that. It was my imagination going, hey, Dad, if you were here, this is what I'd tell you. And I told him about Sue, my wife. I told him about my boys. I told him in what ways they were like him. I told him my best days and my worst days. I said, I wish you'd been there that day, but I'm really glad you weren't there that day. And I reconnected myself to my history to his love of music, love of football, love of broken kids, love of organizations, love of strategy. I just reconnected in my imagination, and I literally got off my bed a different man. I know I did. And it's one of the few messages that I alliterate, but I repented, I redeemed, and he restored a pantry, in my language, a son's pantry. I could go to a pantry and get stuff that I hadn't, the door had been shut, and I couldn't get the words. And it really opened up for me that I had son language in my head for the first time in 32 years. And I actually remembered an event, which actually was with my grandfather. But I'd forgotten the event, and I visualized this event. And a couple of subsequent things happened. One was I realized that because of my responsibility, if my family were in trouble, and to be honest, although I was a prison governor, I lived in the southeast of England. So although I could have earned the same money in Manchester and lived differently. So we weren't wealthy as such. And a lot of our lives we spent, as many people do in this part of the world, in some degree of debt. If there was spare money, I always put spare money to bills. And it's because I didn't ever have a dad who walked in who bypassed the debt and said, I'm not interested in you paying a bill, I want you to have fun. And I realized that I didn't have the joy of the Lord is your strength in times of trouble experience in my life. I had no experience of it because I didn't ever have, and Sue's dad had died as well, so neither of us had dads from 15 and 16 years of age. So I realized that I didn't have that experience. And then actually probably a very beautiful thing, it was a curiously beautiful thing, but a father in my life walked with me from one office to another and gave me a gift valued at $3,000 that I didn't need. And he told me he was going to give it to me on the Wednesday. So I knew he was going to give it to me, and then he was giving it to me. And I said to him, I said, you need to know something. One, I don't need that gift, but this is what you need to know. That's the first gift I've received from a father that I don't need in 32 years of my life. And he cried. Because he knew he had tapped into a story that was nothing to do with $3,000 and everything to do with a heart. So that's really, and that's increasingly my journey. You know, the wonderful thing about most of our testimonies and our lives is that, you know, Bill uses language of fathers and sons, but he doesn't teach from the other side. He doesn't teach from not having had one. And the power of being able to teach from what you don't have is the power of the redemptive nature of our gospel. And I think a lot of people think, oh, what I don't have disqualifies me. It may very well be that actually the thing you don't have may be the thing that will most qualify you to set other people free. Let me just take one more and then I'll have David come up because I stole a bit of question time in case you're... If not, it's fine. Those were good questions. David, come and grab the microphone. David, this is David Chambers. He's our spiritual son. My wife and I have a very deliberate thing about spiritual sons and daughters. They have to be both of ours. That's very deliberate, especially on my part for girls. That's really important. I don't have spiritual daughters unless they're my wife's spiritual daughter. It's as simple as that. And I'm not looking for hundreds of them. I mean, I think there's just some people God gives you, and it's a pretty beautiful story that we got this boy, even if he is from this part of the world and supports West Ham, but I'll forgive him. I love him.
Thank you. No, it's an honour to be here today. And as Paul said, I live 40 minutes down the M11 in Romford, so it's nice to be in a local, as it were, and good yes there. And just going to share just a little bit of my journey with you. And I just, as I've shared this in other places, I believe that, as I said, I came from Romford. What God can do in and through me, my gosh, he can do for anyone here. And so I'm not just telling a story, although it's a great story and it's my story. I believe that there's faith that is going to be imparted to you as I share. So be receptive. And for me, I never wanted to go to Bethel. That wasn't my dream. That wasn't my desire. That I loved the Lord, but wasn't interested in ministry or anything else. And I had a successful career in a sense. I was working with young offenders. Paul and I have worked out that my young people went in and out of his prisons at various points, and I visited his prisons when he had left to Reading. But the Lord called me to go to Bethel, and I didn't want to go, and I fought him, and he won. Long story, he won the argument. I quit my job, I sold my stuff, and I moved to the States. But my last words to the Lord on the plane sitting on Heathrow was, you can have this year, and then I'm getting back to normal life. That was my attitude. I was doing God a favour going. Oh, gosh. 6 weeks in, I always say the best thing I did in 3 years at Bethel, at Reading School, at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry was crash my car. Because what the enemy meant for bad, God used for good. Because Romans 8:20-28, that all things work for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purposes. And I was done. I was ready to leave that place. It was the final straw. It was a minor crash, but I was ready to leave that place. I was finished. And my pastor didn't know what to do with this English boy that was in a bit of a mess. And so this pastor does the only thing they knew and put me in front of this lady called Sue Manwaring, who Paul's wife. And suddenly she spoke my language. I could suddenly see light in this tunnel that was Bethel for me. And she met with me as time went on. We met in Hebrews, if those of you that know that, for a cup of tea every week. And that's how I eventually got connected to Paul and Sue. And the Lord said to me early on that my relationship with Paul would simply be a foreshadow of who he is to me. And again, it's funny, Paul kind of shared some of his story of sonship, and in many respects I became the recipient of Paul treating me as a son, and what that meant in my walk with God. But that's just to set a little, 10 minutes is not enough. Fast forward, 1 year turns into 3 years. That was not my plan, but the Lord has a way of hijacking. He has a way of providing money. He has a way of changing your mindset to see the impossible become possible. And so I've been asked to lead Kenya, Bethel's mission trip to Kenya, and myself and another girl, another third-year girl, are taking a group of students out to do this. I'm going to have to rush through this because it's too long. They want us to lead a crusade out in Kenya, and I am a crusade. Forget that. That is not what I do. I'll happily come and teach in your Bible school. We'll happily come and preach in your church. I don't do evangelism. I don't do the gospel. Kind of not really interested. For those of you that know Paul's story, Paul's just come back from this Reinhard Bonnke school, and he just keeps going on about the gospel this, the gospel that. I'll go and see Paul. Paul hands me a Bonnke DVD. Watch this. It wasn't really what I was hoping. So I stole Reinhard's talk. I've since told Reinhard this, which kind of shows you where I'm going. I stole his talk. I wrote it out. Fast forward to Kenya. They take us to this crusade. There's hundreds of people there, and I'm the evangelist to preach. What? So I've got these notes printed. I've put them on the lectern. I've turned to greet the crowd, and I'm just going to talk rubbish just to try and fill as much time as possible. And I've filled the time, and I've got to start. I turn around to grab my notes. They're gone. The notes are gone. The lectern's gone. What do? Do you run? Do you pray to Jesus come now, finish the world? But I prayed the only prayer I know, which is Jesus help. And it was like out of my being, out of my innermost core, this message just came out of me. And I'm running up and down this stage like the most fiery black Pentecostal preacher you've ever seen in your life. And I'm preaching about the blood that sets you free, Jesus who brings you hope, about the only way to the Father. And at the end, people come forward to get saved, which surprises me. I can see my team at the back with their jaws dropped, like, who is this guy? And I walk off that stage, and the Lord, I physically feel something snap inside of me. And the Lord says to me, you will never be the same. And so that's right at the end of my third year. I've got a couple of weeks left in Reading, and I'm back to Romford. Life changed. What next? What am I going to do? And probably like here, it's a good, hard-working place. And people say to me, "You've had your fun. What are you going to do? Go and get a job." Yeah, good point. And so I make inquiries to go back to the work I used to do. And I can take you to the exact place where I was standing, where I heard the Lord speak just as audibly, just as I'm speaking to you now. And he said, "David, you can do that. But if you do that, that'll be you for the next 30, 40 years. Wait, I've got something for you." That's really not what I wanted to hear. That's really, oh gosh, anything else, Lord? So I waited. It's much to the disappointment of my family, my church, my friends, what are you doing? You can't just... So I worked with a friend doing labouring in his building work, and just to do something. And in this moment, the weeks turn into months, and people are questioning my sanity. But I know I've got a word from God. I know I have, and I'm holding on to that. And many months later, someone sends me an email to say they've entered a competition to go to Africa with Reinhard Bonnke. You should enter too. No one wins those things. Still small voice, enter. So I put my details on the website, press submit, think nothing more of it. Months go past still. I've got this word. God said, wait. I'm waiting. I trust you, Father. I'm waiting. I think I trust you. It's that journey of faith. And I get a phone call out of the blue. Hey, we've just pulled you out of the hat of 55,000 people. You're our UK winner. And as my prize, if you like, I find myself in Accra, Ghana, on a stage with Daniel Kalenda, looking at this sea of beautiful faces and watching Daniel preach with fire, with passion, and you've got to realise, I've just been in this 3 years of Bethel, of seeing the miraculous, of seeing the things of the kingdom, and it's like the penny drops, and Daniel was preaching just one thing and one thing only, Jesus. And it's like, I know it sounds obvious, but it was like, for me, it's the gospel that makes all the kingdom possible. Like, it is only about Jesus. It is only about a cross. It is only about him coming and making a way. And again, I haven't got time. I get connected to Daniel Kalenda. Daniel invites me to come and work for him, to travel with him across the globe, to live in Orlando and be based out of there. And US immigration, in their wisdom, block that. I've just completed a 3-year student visa in California. What's going on? And I have to go on this journey of, God, I've waited for you. I've been waiting that this thing's come. This is what I'm waiting for. You can't now pull the rug from under my feet. Like, what do I say to people? You give and take away. This isn't who I know you to be. And I had to go on this journey of disappointment, this journey of, the Lord met me in some incredible ways that I had just no time to share. But it was only when I got myself to a place where I'm like, God, I will trust you when I don't see your goodness. I will trust you when I don't see the answer to prayer. I will trust that you are good and that you are for me, even if I can't see it. And when I got myself into that place of, I'm a son, I'm good, it was then that I get a phone call again from the same guy, this UK director. We're so sorry what happened with Daniel. We know it all messed you about. We don't want to lose you from the organisation. We don't want to lose you from the ministry. Daniel was saying, will you come and work for us in London? Will you come and be our London representative? And it just amazes me that the Lord allowed me to go on this process of pain, this process of choosing him in the mystery. God, I'm good with you, even though I don't get this. When I was ranting and raving, there was no phone call. He let me be. He let me rant and rave. But when I was, God, I will trust you when I do not see it, the phone call came. And so since then, I found myself, for those of you that went to the fire conference, being involved, that was kind of the last 6 months of my life has been put in that fire conference on. The last couple of years I've been travelling around London preaching, teaching, just representing Jesus. And what Reinhard and Daniel are doing. And so but I take it all back to, for me, actually, this started as a journey of sonship. For those of you that do know Paul's story, Paul ended up at Reinhard's school. That wasn't his. That's a long series of events, and you have to get on iBethel TV and find that out. But I positioned myself in Bethel to be a son. Okay, I want to really push myself into this. When parties came up, or Paul wanted a lift to the airport, I'd already made my choice. I will serve Paul and Sue. I'll drive them to wherever. That's how I want to position myself. And I find it incredible that my journey, in a sense, has, to an extent, mirrored Paul jumping into evangelism, jumping into the gospel. And so I know it's not about me, because, as I say, I'm some boy from Romford. And if he can do it for me, my word, he can do it for Bishop Stortford. Absolutely. And I just want to finish with this last thing. You know, all of us, at New Year, I always spend time just, okay, Lord, what are you saying for this year? What do I need to know going into this year? And the Lord downloaded to me some wonderful promises and some wonderful stuff to hold on to. And I found myself kind of giddy, if you like, with these promises, with these things of him. And yet I was just kind of finishing this time. And then as he was finishing, he just said, and yet I will be your exceedingly great reward. That bit in Genesis 15:12. Where Abraham has all those promises of God, of his future, of what it's going to be, and yet I will be your great reward. And so I just release over you that actually, whatever it is you're facing in life, whatever it is you're dreaming of, as we were talking this morning, whatever it is that the Lord is bubbling within you, and yet I will be your great reward. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It is all about him, about his beauty, about his majesty, and his love for you, right where you're at. So, yeah.
Good job. Excellent. Very good. Good job. It's good. It's been fun to watch. I want to talk about your greatest leadership problem. She's looking nervous down here. It's not the most difficult person in the church. It's not your pastor. It's not your money. It's none of those things. The biggest leadership challenge is leading you. It's me leading me. My greatest leadership challenge is to lead me. And I'll hit a lot of things fairly quickly, but if you were here this morning, you've worked out that that's what I do. I just get the tape, listen to it again, and if you didn't understand it, God will explain it to you, because he kind of told me about it, so he must know more than me. So once again, I'm going to go quadrant on this, and I may not get too far past the first one, but these are 4 elements of this that I like to teach about: leading me, discovering me, expressing me, and my next step. And I'm going to start up here. We may or may not get too far past that. I'll give you a summary of these just so that you're not frustrated and hate me and say, why didn't he tell me more about that? But this is your greatest leadership challenge, leading you. Really, it really is. And I've divided it up in this way. And so leading me. And I start here with believing my story. You see, I probably mentioned this morning, but it's really easy for you to believe my story. It's why I read out the diversity thing, because I just want to provoke you a little bit, because That's my story. It's really easy, if Reinhard Bonnke was here, you can believe his story. It's easy to believe. But he lived it. I mean, he lived a story that as he went through it, he was just trusting God for the next step. And so believing my story as the speaker up here is relatively easy. You can listen and go, oh yeah, of course, his grandfather-in-law told him to do that, so he did that, and he went there and he went and did that. Well, it's a little bit sanitized, all stories are, but you go, oh, he's got a great story. But God doesn't need you to believe my story, he needs you to believe your story. That's really, really important. And I want to suggest this to you, that believing your story is where your authority comes from. Now, I know there are other ways of accessing authority. And I would definitely, we've already prayed for one couple, but I would definitely pray for, at the end, we'll finish about 4 and I'm going to minister for about 15 minutes to a few things. But my wife was healed of infertility 31 years ago nearly. Secondary infertility, I guess they call it, because we had one child and then we're 4 years. And she has endometriosis and she got healed. And I can tell you when exactly when she was healed. And that's our story. And we believe our story. Now, it really began probably 2008. It's not that we hadn't prayed for other people before that, but we hadn't prayed with the same intensity as praying for people to be healed of infertility. And the first person actually that we prayed for to be healed of infertility was our daughter-in-law. Now, when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I stood in Bill Johnson's office, which is probably the best place to stand if you've just been diagnosed with cancer. There's not many better places. And Bill looked at me, I told him the diagnosis. He looked at me and he said, Paul, what's the fight about? Those are his words. It's a genius question. If you're in leadership, it's a genius question. Why? Because it lifts your gaze above your problem to, okay, this is about something else. Now, in all honesty, at first I thought, well, it must be that I'm going to save a continent or something. It must be something massive. But as I looked down at the ground, I realized that there had never been 3 generations of male Manwarings alive on the planet at the same time. So my dad didn't know his grandfather. I didn't know my dad's dad. My boys didn't know my dad. And I just looked up and said, Bill, never been 3 generations of male Manwarings alive at the same time. He said, that's fine. Well, not long after that, and my son didn't know that piece of the story, but my son James called me from England and said, Amy and I are going to start trying for a baby. And wonderful news, because it's nothing quite like being a grandparent. And but it wasn't working out for them. And so they were the first people we prayed for, and the whole story ends up that they gave us our first grandson, Aidan. She was healed of polycystic ovaries and then had a second son very easily. I believe our story, that gives me authority because I can bring from the past that story and it gives me authority. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. See, you need to believe your story. I would really encourage you as leaders to spend time on your story. Now, I don't just mean your salvation testimony story. I mean your story. And because I share a lot, it's the way I am. And I remember, curious dates and incidents along the way. But I believe my story. It gives me authority. See, if you're always looking at someone else's story, apart from anything else, you're probably comparing yourself. And my experience is I very rarely win the comparison battle. Theirs is always better than mine somehow. And so I invalidate myself by comparison. Let me just very quickly give you this. I got given a prophetic word, 2012, I would preach in stadiums. That's crazy. Anybody who knew me would know nothing could probably be further from Paul's thoughts. He teaches on sonship, leadership, organization, strategy, but stadiums? You got to be kidding me. It takes me, as David said, to Reinhard Bonnke's School of Evangelism. Last place I ever expected to find myself. I thought that they would find out that I was a fraud while I was there and send me out on the streets to do street evangelism and discover I was useless. I honestly thought that. It was what was going on inside of me, sitting in a room with 99 evangelists and me. I got wrecked at that school, not because it's a great school, except it's the greatest school I've ever been to. But what I mean is the content's not really well laid out curriculum-wise. It's just a bunch of people telling their story. But I got wrecked. I come back from that school, and Ben Fitzgerald, who is an Australian who came to Bethel, who's a pure evangelist, he tells me he's going to organise this stadium event in Nuremberg, Germany, and that I was going. I sat and watched the stage being built. I watched it. I watched Europe shall be saved put above that stage. Actually, it said Europe will be saved, but we changed it to Europe shall be saved because shall is stronger than will. That's because I'm a civil servant and got a bit of legal stuff in me. But I watched it being built. Now, my dad had walked the streets of Germany 70 years before. He was part of the team that built the bomb, Barnes-Wallis bouncing bomb. He was seconded by British intelligence to clear out the bomb-making equipment of Germany. Going to Germany is not a coincidence. It's the Paul Kane word. Paul, it's California, UK, Germany. I have a story. I believe my story. I know that when I walk out on that stage to preach for the first time ever to 26,000 people, I have a story. It gave me authority that I could walk out there. Second Awakening Europe is Stockholm. I'm a hostage negotiator trainer. Weird thing to have done, but I've done it. Stockholm means to me Stockholm Syndrome. What's Stockholm Syndrome? It's when the victims of a situation become too closely aligned to the perpetrator. I have a message for you, Sweden. I have a message, Stockholm. You have become too closely associated with the enemy. You need to separate yourselves. You need to stand for purity and unity and the power of the gospel. How do I have the authority to do that? Because I have a story. This is not... For anyone else, it was Nuremberg and Stockholm. For me, that's where my dad was, and this is where I have some understanding of what your problem is. And the Third Awakening Europe just happens to be held in Prague, which just happens to be where my wife's mother was born. What are the odds? This is personal. This is my story. It meant that when I got to Prague, I had something to say. Your daughters, it says in the Bible, will be carried in your arms. I am here, as it were, carrying a daughter of this nation. I have something to say. She was born there before communism. 40 years of communism is in between that, and I'm back. What does God teach me out of this? He taught me that I could walk on stages and call out the identity of nations. There's nothing in my past that qualifies me at one level, but there's everything in my past that qualified me. So I now know, I don't care where Awakening Europe is now, he only has to tell me to do things a couple of times, and I get it. I get the message. I'm not the soul winner on that stage. There's Todd White, there's Daniel Calender, there's Ben Fitzgerald, there's a bunch of others. I can do it, but it's not my call. My call is to call out the identity of the nations we go to. But it's my story. Does this make sense? So it's finding that. It's believe your story. Do you believe your story? Do you even know your story? Take note of these little incidents, these moments, the times, the dates, the places. And I watch for them, and I weave these things together. It's just the way that I've learned to be. So believe your story. It's where your authority comes from. As a leader, again, and this would be the next one, is knowing me. How well do you know you? Now, clearly, this team here know to go to Barbara there and go, we need another one of these events. She's good at it. They know her. Send her in, sort it out. Because they know her. She works for them. Yeah? We're good at that. But what you should do is know you. Because you should know what you should send you in to do. Because we waste a lot of time sending ourselves in to do things that we're not qualified to do, or we play this false humility thing and we send someone else in to do something that we should do. We need to know ourselves. I know, give me 5 people in a leadership team, a whiteboard and half an hour, and I can help you. I don't care what your problem is. I don't even need to know your problem. I know I can help you. Why? Because I know me. I know that I have a gift of around strategy in a natural and a supernatural way. I don't always understand it, but I know I do. So I know to send me in. So in terms of leading you, how well do you know you? When was the last time you interviewed yourself for your job? the job you do. Ask yourself, what are the areas of my strengths? What should I be doing more of? What should I be doing less of? Now, we all have grunt work to do. We all have that stuff that we don't want to do. That's part of life. But what I'm talking about is, how well do you know that if I go in there, I'm the right man for the job, I'm not the right man for that job? I've started to make decisions when I can. It's not, you can't always do this, I understand. But I look for what nourishes me. So there are some things that nourish me. That's the key to whether or not that's a place of strength or a place that drains me. And we should all be working, if as much as we can, at that point of strength, of the things that nourishes. Honestly, this nourishes me. Now, some people, like meetings, like too many meetings, like I find it draining, they'll say. It's like, no, actually, if I'm teaching leaders, I find it nourishing. I genuinely do find it nourishing. I probably get as much from it as I give in many respects. So how well do you know you? Do you know I should send myself in for that, but I shouldn't send myself in for that? Because you might be wasting time, you might be wasting energy, you might be contributing to your own burnout, to be honest. So spend some time knowing you. I remember when I was promoted from Brixton, got sent to Belmarsh, and was opening Belmarsh, on the team that opened Belmarsh, which is this side of town, isn't it, more? Although I still drove. I drove from Staines near Windsor to Belmarsh for 20 months. My youngest son only saw me on my days off. It was bad planning. So I worked at Belmarsh for 6 months without prisoners because we weren't open. Now that is the perfect prison. Some would say the perfect church is without people. I wouldn't agree with that personally, but they might be in the wrong job in that case. But I remember the first weekend that I was, and my grade meant that I was in charge one weekend in 4. I remember the first weekend I was in charge. And I remember walking down those corridors into the Category A unit, which was built for terrorism and stuff like that. And I had to make a decision that I had to go, no, I am qualified for this job. I'm qualified to lead this place this weekend. It doesn't matter, there's people around that have got more years experience, etc., etc. But I know me. I passed the test. And I had to change, physically I had to change my demeanor and walk in with confidence. So knowing me is where my confidence comes from. So if you're lacking confidence, spend some time getting to know you. And you might adjust some things. And then managing me. Now, I believe in the 5-fold. Body, soul, spirit, wallet, relationship. He should have put it in. Possible should have used it. It's fun. No, what am I saying? How well do you manage you in those areas? Body, soul, spirit, wallet, relationship. Why? Because if you're leading people, and leading people, you will nearly always be involved in helping people with one of those scenarios in their lives. Almost guaranteed. It's impossible for you to lead people and not have somebody with a physical problem, an emotional problem, a spiritual problem, a financial problem, a relational problem. If you have, tell me your secret. But those people are everywhere. Now, if you're leading those people, but you're not managing you in those areas, you have a problem. You have a gap between what you say and what you do. So, in other words, if I am helping somebody with a particular problem that I'm not dealing with myself, I'm a hypocrite. So managing me is where my integrity comes from. So it's just, I would just be challenge you, ask questions. Now, I think there are some things you just might not be as gifted in. Like I'll say to people, I don't typically there are some exceptions, but I don't typically spend a lot of time trying to help single people with dating and relationships. It's not an integrity gap with me. It's just a complete lack of experience. I met my wife when I was 15. Well, I didn't meet my wife. I met Sue. She became my wife. It'd be awkward if I met my wife before I knew her. But anyway, there is a difference. I'm not saying it's for everything, but you know, if I'm helping somebody with a major weight problem and I'm carrying a ton of weight, or I eat a terrible diet and I'm trying to help them, I'm a hypocrite. See, what we need to do is to I believe that the world is looking for integrity. In fact, it may be more on the agenda today than ever before, especially in the church. And integrity is when there's no gap between what I say and what I do, and there's no gap between what I say my motivations are and what my motivations are. I'll tell you, you can spot people who don't have integrity, and I guarantee you do it all the time. You walk away and you go, can't put my finger on it, but there's something doesn't quite add up about that person. What you're saying is there's a gap between what they say and do. So how well are you managing you? Just pay attention, especially in the areas where you're helping other people. Because otherwise we're hypocrites. Does that make sense? And integrity is linked to trust and belief. Believability. I want to be believable. I want people to go, he gives that good advice. And actually, when I spend time in his house with him and his wife, he's the same person. A good same person. Not, he is an idiot on the platform and he's an idiot in his house. No, I don't want that one. You know what I'm saying? The right way round. So how well are you managing you? Because, you see, it's where your integrity comes from. See, what does the world need from us? What do people need from us? Authority, people who walk in authority, people who walk in confidence, people who walk in integrity, and do you know where you're going? Habakkuk says, write the vision, that he who reads it may run with it. Who reads it? You. First person who reads what you wrote is the person who wrote it. I know it's very logical, but it's true, isn't it? If you write a vision for you, the first person who reads it is you. Write the vision that he who reads it may run with it. See, when we're meant to have a vision, do you know where you're going? Like if you were asked, like he asked me a question, what do you come back to do? If I go, I haven't got a clue. It's like, well, that's the end of leadership seminar by Paul Manwaring. He hasn't got a clue where he's going. See, leading you, answering the question, where are you going, is actually where your followers come from. And as the man said, a leader who doesn't have any followers is merely taking a walk. Somebody said it, something like that anyway. So, and this is what's needed in the world. People who have authority, have confidence, have integrity, and know where they're going. So this is the first step is leading me. Life's most difficult problem, yeah? Anyone questions about that? That's all clear. You all got all that. Okay, great. Let's go number two. And there's all of these have got massive stuff behind them. This can help you in a number of areas, but I just call it discovering me. It's they talk about this, if you're writing a book, people will write to you and say, what's your elevator pitch? In other words, in the 2 minutes going up the elevator, the lift, whatever you want to call it, what would you tell somebody? This is kind of like an elevator coaching session, okay? So if I've just got a couple of minutes, somebody says to me, hey, help me. I don't have a clue, what my life's about. This is where I quickly will go. I'll go, okay, 4 things. What do you love? Simple question. No, one of the hardest questions you will ever ask yourself. What do you love? It's part of my diversity thing. It's been part of my journey. When all of us are raised in homes with either an absence of love or a presence of fear, to some degree or another. Even Jesus. Because Jesus was perfect, but his parents weren't. So even Jesus was raised. Now here's the problem. If I'm raised in an absence of love, I'll perform for attention. If I'm raised in a presence of fear, I'll perform to avoid punishment. So very few of us actually know what we love. Like, what do you love? And I break this down into these 3 things, and it's linked into another assignment on here as well. But what do I love? Just inanimate. What do I love to do? And what outcomes do I love? Now, you might look at that and go, that's easy. That is probably one of the hardest things you may ever do. Here's what I believe, though. If you don't answer this question, you sell your neighbor short. Because the Bible says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't know what you love, it might be difficult for you to love you. Because you don't know what you love about you. Does that make sense? So what do you love? Simple stuff. Like what colors? Flavors. I was with somebody some years ago who had a very, very broken past. And they sat in a shop that had 16 flavors of pies, dessert pies. They couldn't choose. They honestly couldn't choose which pie. I don't know, they just said, I don't know which one. Now, I think, we live in a slightly different world, and I love watching my little grandsons. My oldest grandson from 2 years, 18 months, was always said to me, favourite colours? Blue and green. How do you know? Who told you, I want to say? How did you work that out? Well, he was always given a choice. He was always genuinely given freedom of choice. I watched my youngest grandson, who was given a very, very difficult choice somewhere the summer of last year. Do you want to go with your Uncle Luke, who you're named after? Fletcher Luke's his name, the best name in the world. Fletcher, it's a different name that's not weird, that's incredibly powerful. I love it. Anyway, we took him to the Tower of London, and there's a little sign there. It says, Fletcher makes the best arrows. My little boy goes around going, I make the best arrows. Like, you've never made an arrow in your life. But anyway, so he was given this really difficult choice. Are you going to follow your Uncle Luke's football team, Manchester United, or your dad's team, bearing in mind your dad really doesn't follow football very much, which is Tottenham Hotspur. He chose Tottenham Hotspur. He's become an absolute fanatic. But my point is this, he was able to make that choice. So some of us have got a battle on our hands in this area straight away. And I'll give it as, when I do the last one, as something that you can do. But this will help you discover you. What are you afraid of? And the devil is a liar, a cheat, and a copycat. In case you didn't know. He's a liar, a cheat, and a copycat. He kills, steals, destroys. But here it is. He hasn't got any original thought. So he steals original thought and reverses it. He flips it. If you start to discover what you're afraid of and you start to flip it, you may very well discover what you're called to. Because the enemy will throw things at you that are actually the opposite of what he knows you're called to do. So sometimes in your fear is a key by flipping it. My wife hates passionately flying. You have to admit that's pretty funny. She has done a lot of flying, and she's had to fly to see her grandchildren, and now we fly all around the world. She still doesn't like it very much. She just developed a strategy. She just sits in planes and says, turbulence doesn't happen on my plane, and most of the time it doesn't. I've watched it stop when it's been pretty bad, because she's turned that fear in. No, God, you destined me to fly. I don't like flying, so I'm going to do something about it. So what are you afraid of? What are your victories or your testimonies? Knowing this, Bill Johnson's teaching, basically that the word testimony contains within it the desire for God to do it again. So when you discover your testimony, you discover a desire of heaven to do it again. If you're just struggling to find, what do I do with the rest of my life? These will start to open up thought processes, doors, ideas for you. You might be young, you might be old. It doesn't matter. These are all in there. And it's definitely been a journey of mine to overcome these. And victories, testimonies, and prophecies, which I've already mentioned in the keys to the kingdom. But, the very reason why prophecies are powerful is because prophecies are an encounter with a God who knows your future. So when you have a prophetic word given to you, it says God's already visited. He's already seen your future. And so these start to help you with a dialogue. So you can literally take this home and you can just sit down and you could spend time with it. Some of you will spend loads of time, you'll journal because what you love is journals. Others will speak it out. But it just starts to give you some clues, because one thing I have worked out about the whole what time is it, we are a destiny generation. I don't think there's ever been a generation alive who are so desperate to know why are we alive and what difference are we going to make. Certainly the Western world. It's obviously not the same in the third world. So, discovering me. Did I call the other one expressing? Let's see what I called it. Expressing me. I haven't got time to go into this, and I've got a little bit more work to do on it. But what I've noticed is, and I base this out of the Jewish marriage. And in the Jewish marriage, there are 4 covenants. And there's a covenant of sonship, a covenant of servant, a covenant of lover, and a covenant of friend. It's stunningly beautiful. There are symbols. The symbol of son is a sandal. The symbol of lover or bride is marriage. The symbol of servant is blood. The symbol of friend is salt, which might give you some clues why some wedding services steal some of those bits, but it originally comes from the beautiful Jewish wedding service, which is so full of stories. But here's what I've noticed. What I've noticed is that each one of us could probably go for one of those, which is a strength. But what I think we need to do is to learn where we need to grow. So I'm that through and through. I'm a civil servant, even title. I serve. I'm almost uncomfortable having people make me lunch because I spent most of my life in the kitchen in church. You know, you come to my house, I'll be making you coffee, good coffee, important, really important. I love to serve. But I know, and one of the things I know is that consequently can actually be quite difficult for me just to be a friend with there being kind of no strings attached. So I start to look at what areas of my life I need to grow. So the first question is, where's your strength? Is it a strength overextended? Because that can be a problem. But then what I'd say is there one of these where you really need to grow? Now, I'm talking here, lover of Jesus. That, I know where I do that well, but I also know where I do that weakly. So what I look at here is just spend some time thinking about how you express you. Now, I know I do a good job of that. Any environment I go into, I know I do a good job of that. I'm learning this just to be a friend. Now, you start to see where there are different places. Like, for instance, I didn't have brothers. So I think that sometimes that can be a challenge because I want to have healthy male friendships. But that's been an area of weakness for me, both in the natural, and therefore I haven't always managed to work it out. So I know that this helps me to learn how to grow in that area. Does this make sense? So how do you express you? Which of these most describes you? Now, I know this has been an incredible journey of mine, and I'm happy and happier with how I manifest as a son. See, some people teach almost a language which suggests graduation. That, you graduate from being a servant to a friend to a son to a lover. I don't agree. Right? The best advice I can give to a young woman who wants to get married, and I don't do much of this, I've already told you that, is find yourself a son who's a servant and a lover. You want a son because otherwise nothing's ever good enough. You want a servant because you want breakfast in bed, and the lover I'll leave for your imagination. It's not meant to be a graduation. It's meant to be a weaving. This is the way we express ourselves. And of course, this is the way that Jesus expressed himself. So this is a journey to being Christ-like. And I want to be Christ-like, which I assume you do too. And Jesus is the Son who came to serve, not to be served, who is a lover of the bride, who is the friend. Does that make sense? So it's just another way of digging into you becoming more like him. And then finally, my next step. Anyone here, what do I do next? A few of you. Okay. Now, I've got a longer version of this, which I walk people through, but don't have time to do that. It's the sort of thing that I actually do love to do. I call it whiteboard coaching. But what I've noticed is that a lot of the time we're asking for a question that can't quite be answered. You know, like, what do I do next? What job do I do? What next big step? What I've noticed is that this, what I'm about to give you, often helps people to get that next piece because it takes them through a door that they weren't quite expecting. And in the process, the next piece works out. So I've coached people in these areas, and they've written to me 2 years later and said, if it wasn't for that, I never would have got married. It's like, well, that has nothing to do with your marriage, but it was everything to do with their marriage. Does that make sense? So what's your next step? Number one is a love journey. Now, I've already told you about it, but if you sat there and you thought, I don't know what I love, then you need to know what you love. You owe yourself to know what you love. It was definitely a part of my journey. I think it was related to becoming a son, and God took me on a journey. But it really was a challenge from what do I really love? What do I love to do? What do I just love? What flavors do I love, etc. And I just spend time on it. Now, all I would suggest is spend whatever time you want, but I usually say 28 days. Buy an expensive journal or a cheap journal, depending on whether you love journals or not. Or do it on your iPhone, record it, whatever you want to do it on your Instagram live story. You can do it any way you like. But ask yourself, what do I love? Go through life. Normal life. Don't do it in church. Do it in life. Do it out shopping. Do it in the woods. Doing eating a meal. Do it in a restaurant. What do I love? What flavors do I love? Like, do you prefer berries to chocolate? You know, do you prefer citrus to berries? What do you actually just love? Because it's all part of getting to know you. If you believe that God created this whole planet for our joy and our pleasure, then it's a real drag if we don't work out what we enjoy in this planet. And that's part of my diversity thing. You know, I love art. I love creativity. I do love to cook. I do love to make great coffee. You know, I actually love to care for people. I really loved being a nurse. I really did. I mean, every now and then, it doesn't often happen, but every now and then I'll find out that somebody's sick. Certainly it would be males these days, although when I was a nurse it didn't have to be. But I've been known to go around to people who are sick and give them a blanket bath. You might think that's really weird. I love doing that. Absolutely love making somebody feel fresh and clean in their bed. Love doing it. What do you love? What do you love to do? And what outcomes do you love? What fruit do you love? I finally, in my journey, worked out I love changed lives. That's what I live for. They get saved, that's obviously great, but I love changed lives. So I call it changed people, changed organizations, and these days, crazy enough to believe, changed nations and changed continents. But it was a journey. So do you know what you love? Go on a 28-day journey. I spent a year observing my wife and what she loved. I felt like I was missing something in my knowledge of her. And I watched her. I discovered what she loved, you know. And when it came to Valentine's Day, I bought her the 10 things I'd noticed in the year that she loved. And one of them was bargains. My wife loves a bargain. Like, if she can save money, she will probably buy something she never intended to buy and be delighted that she saved money buying something she never intended to buy. So I bought her a $150 handbag that was reduced to $2.50. It was horrible. It was disgusting. But the point was, she loves a bargain. So it's just to help you guys out. Valentine's Day's coming up. Another South African over there. Was that South African? Donkey? No? Oh, I thought, right, okay. What do you love? Do you know what you love? Yeah, is everyone okay with that? What are you afraid of? Well, maybe your next journey is to overcome fear. An overcoming fear journey. Really simple. You might go, it's not that simple. No, it's really simple. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. What we all need to learn to do is to enable our head knowledge to become our heart knowledge that becomes our behavior. It's a 3-step program. So what I'll get people to do is, identify what you're afraid of. I tell you, some people, one of the most powerful things I've noticed that people are afraid of is making a choice. And there's some people who get paralyzed by choice. It's like they can't make a choice. God hasn't given you a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. So I'll get them to declare over themselves that verse. So whatever you're afraid of, just start to declare. Go on a journey for however long you like. Grab the thing that you fear, have it as it were in your head, but start to declare. But don't just declare it. Don't just go, God has not given me a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. It needs to go from your head to your heart to your whole body. You need to believe it. And sometimes we just need to take a personal posture. And I'll always say to people, get your shoulders back, your chest out, your head up, and tell that mirror in the morning, God has not given me a spirit of fear, because you don't believe it unless you start looking like that. So go on a fear journey. Some of you, it's an overcoming fear journey that you need to go on next. It might even be about some of the leading you stuff that's the problem. So next one is a community journey. Some of you, you could do anything in the world, but you have never really experienced healthy community. I notice this with people. There's some people who are incredibly talented, gifted, they can do anything. But this is what they need. Now, it's not always easy, but in a local church like this that is obviously buzzing with community, nobody should feel alone. Nobody should have to feel, I'm sure that's the leadership's desire. And there are opportunities there, but nobody can make you take the opportunity. Sometimes you have to make that decision. Leadership can be lonely. And you have to make decisions to really engage with community. Now, it might be one, it might be two. It might be, actually, what I really need, I've never had the influence of a mum in my life. That's really what David's story with my wife is. My wife sat down with him and was a mum who coached him through the aftermath of car accident, and now these days speaks pretty straight into his life, to say the least. And that's part of his story. I mean, he reminded me, I wrote in a book that I gave him, probably Kisses, you were a son to Sue before you were a son to me. And so some of you, that's what you need. And that might be your focus. And then others, and I'm going to wrap up by explaining this in a moment. Others, what you need is to pursue what I call convergence. Now, this can be a way out there thing. Let me draw it on a separate piece of paper. I describe convergence as something like this. Convergence is, I went American. It's when I love what I do, I'm growing in skills, and money is taken care of. Now that might mean you don't need money, or it might mean you earn money. And then for me, the convergence is this. Community, which I've just mentioned, and inner self. All of this is wrapped up in really a lot of what I've just done. Convergence is when I live there, my community nourishes what I do, and what I do nourishes my community, and my inner self nourishes what I do, and what I do nourishes my inner self. Now that, though, is too big for most people. Like, in other words, you're going to love what you do, money's taken care of, you're constantly getting better, your community's being blessed by it, and your inner self's being blessed by it. That's huge, isn't it? It's way out there. So what I like to do is just to go like this. Quick inventory check of you and where you are in life. Are you doing something right now that is growing skills? You're getting better at something. Doesn't matter what it is. Might be leading a Bible study. It might be latte art on your coffee, which would be mine at the moment. And do you do something with your life that you love? Like, you just love it. It's got nothing to do with money. It's got nothing to do with the people you're around. You just love doing it. You love, I don't know, throwing pots or painting pictures or whatever you love, yeah? Are you taking care of money? Is your inner self nourished? Are you doing things to nourish your inner self, to have a healthy inner self? And is your community blessing you, and are you blessing your community? Now, this is convergence. This is a convergent life because it contains all the elements. And as you'll see, some of these overlap with what I've been teaching you about. But this, when you meet people that are like this, you can see it in them. You just can. And this is what people around you need. They need somebody who's growing in skills, who's doing, new things, who does things that they love, who's taking care of their sort of resource needs in life, who's got a healthy inner life, and their community are blessed and they bless their community. Does that make sense? So, there's a lot of information I've just given you there, which is why I'm going to build a course and put... But this is really what all of these elements are here. Let's find this bit of paper. Then we'll pray for some people. I'll probably pray for your brains as well, because some of you have got hurting, probably. So, how well are you doing at leading you? Do you believe your story? Do you know you? Do you manage you? Do you know where you're going? Discovering you. Do you know what you love? Do you know what you're afraid of? What are your testimonies or victories or memories? And what are your prophecies or dreams? They're clues to helping you work out, where do I go next? Expressing me. Where do you shine the most? Are you a son, a lover, a friend, a servant? Where are you strong, but where do you need to grow? And then my next step. Is your next step a love journey, an overcoming fear journey, a community journey, or a convergent life journey? Where you just carry out an inventory and say, okay, let me just check my life. Where am I growing in skills? Because you don't ever want to be stagnant. Where am I doing something I love? How well am I taking care of finance, resources? Are the things that I'm doing helping with that? Am I working on my healthy inner life? Is my community nourished by what I do? And do I nourish my community? Does my community nourish me? A lot of information, but I believe that's what the world needs. It needs people who are good at leading themselves. It says in Proverbs, plans of a man are like deep waters, and a man of wisdom draws them out. Well, the man of wisdom's you. Let's stop being so dependent on other people and actually become the man of wisdom for ourselves.